Obitur Solutions, a leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, is proud to bring its official support to the group of SIDS Leaders Conference.
Excellencies, ministers, honoured officials from the international agencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this second meeting of the Group of Small Island Developing States Leaders, otherwise known as SIDS. My name is Juliet Foster, and I'll be guiding you through 90 minutes of lively and what I'm sure will be thought-provoking debate on the theme of pandemics, prevention and preparedness. Now, this event builds on the success of the first SIDS leaders meeting, which took place in early May. And at that time, we explored the impact of the Cotonou Trade Agreement on small islands. Now, as the international community begins to build a future beyond COVID-19, small island developing states are demanding a voice in contributing to and indeed benefiting from the process. But it has to start with addressing the distribution of vaccines to the largely vulnerable community of some 38 sovereign small islands across the globe. Now, to put this in perspective, a recent policy brief by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs reported that the number of COVID-19 related deaths per 100,000 people was actually higher in SIDS compared to other developing country groups and regions, and I'm including within that LDCs and LLDCs. So from the UN to the World Bank, from the EU to the various NGOs, the pandemic is seen as having not only magnified the vulnerabilities of SIDS, but has also faced them with stark choices that have the potential to cause long-term economic and social damage. A 2020 UNCTAD report found that SIDS experienced a GDP fall of 9% compared to a 3.3% decline in other developing countries. At the same time, only 6% of COVID-19 related spending for developing countries was spent on small island developing states. That's an increase of 2% from August 2020. Well, the result of this is that COVID-19 is stretching national budgets to breaking point, with SIDS having to choose between paying off external debts or preparing for another pandemic or even the next tropical storm. Well, as SIDS struggle to repair their public balance sheet, extra funds will be required to finance the immediate health response to lead the way to economic recovery once the pandemic itself is brought under control. It's fair to say that this is a truly massive task for small island developing states who rely on commodity exports, tourism, and indeed other services. So today we're going to explore whether the international community and transnational organisations recognise the enormity of the challenge and whether we're doing enough to help. And what about the vaccine programme? COVAX, the body responsible for making vaccines globally available, has approved another $775 million to fund the delivery of the COVID-19 jab to lower income countries over the next 2 years. Does it go far enough? And how much of a difference will it make realistically? Well, to debate these issues, I'm delighted to say that we have a distinguished panel of experts. They each have an allocated amount of time to give a speech outlining their position, after which they will be asked further questions. And I'd like to stress at that time that it is important for all of you to stick to the amount of time that you have been given, as there is quite a lot of ground that we have to cover in the time available. Also as well, if you could mute your microphones when you're not using them, that would also be very helpful. Now, before we hear those speeches, I would like to call to the floor the co-founder of this SIDS group, His Excellency David Doyle. He is the ambassador of St. Kitts and Nevis, and he's going to share his opening thoughts and indeed some warm words of welcome. So, Excellency, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Juliet. Excellencies, distinguished guests, welcome to this Global SIDS Leaders event devoted to pandemics and its implications for small island developing states. Now, this is the second such event which brings together leading experts from the European Commission, the UN family of organizations, multilateral and bilateral organizations, along with senior ministers from the small islands to debate critical strategic issues about the future stability of this particular community. SIDS makes up something like 38 sovereign states scattered across the globe, from the Caribbean to the Pacific, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, representing some 20% of the UN membership. It was with a view to giving these particular small islands a more assertive voice at transnational level that the GSL was initiated by the governments of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Solomon Islands, Dominican Republic, and the Seychelles earlier this year to fulfill this ambition. The GSL platform enables these small islands to articulate their strategic vision at transnational level on strategic issues such as the one we're going to discuss today, a damaging pandemic inflicting huge economic hardship on islands with limited institutional capacity to respond. In collaboration with my co-founding partner, Ambassador Jean-Paul Catteron from the Solomon Islands, we will be rolling out future GSL thematic debates in the next couple of months on social, economic, and financial policy areas affecting SIDS. But let me leave you with one simple thought. Despite representing 20% of the UN membership, the remoteness of these small island developing states, their size, their limited institutional capacity, means that sometimes they struggle to get their voice heard at bilateral and multilateral fora. So ultimately, the GSL initiative seeks to inscribe SIDS' strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats at the heart of the global development agenda, and allows SIDS to become an integral part of the solutions to the big issues that we are trying to tackle globally at the moment, whether it be climate change or combating this pandemic. Allow me in conclusion to thank the sponsors of today's event, Aubetoir Fiduciaire, and its president, Nicolas Koudros. Enjoy the event. Thank you.
Ambassador Doyle, thank you so much for that. Let me now introduce Mr. John Zutt. Now, John Zutt is the Director of Strategy, Risk and Results at the World Bank. And importantly, within the context of today's meeting, he is responsible for World Bank policy intervention covering all small states, islands or landlocked. And prior to this role, he was the bank's country director for Turkey. So, John Zutt, the floor is now yours and you have 5 minutes.
Thanks, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Obviously, the World Bank has been following the COVID pandemic very closely. We know that it's pushed about 120 million people globally into extreme poverty over the last year. And for the first time in about 20 years, poverty is likely to have significantly increased, reversing the gains of the last decade. We also know that the recovery from COVID will be slow and uneven, particularly for small states, and particularly for those small states, many of them SIDS, who rely on tourism. And we, of course, are aware that the challenge of recovering from COVID combines with many other enormous challenges that small states face, from natural disasters and climate change, to which they're particularly vulnerable, to having narrow, undiversified economies and often high levels of dependence on a few commodities or exports. We know that the impact of COVID on small states has been disproportionate. The Premier of Nevis was mentioning the collapse of real GDP for many small states. On average, it's contracted about 7 to 8%, compared to about 2.5% for all emerging markets. And many small island economies that are tourist dependent have seen double-digit decline. So this has been an enormous hit. We've seen the tourism sector decline by something between 60 and 80% globally last year, resulting in a loss of revenue of about $1 trillion. So we also expect that most tourist-dependent economies will not be able to return to pre-crisis levels of economic activity until sometime in 2022, with much of that dependent on the success of vaccination campaigns against COVID, not just in the small states themselves, but also in countries where tourists originate. So this has been a massive shock for small states. It's caused significant economic decline, but also direct and indirect job losses. It's thrown a lot of people into poverty, and it has disproportionately, by the way, affected women who have had to pick up extra responsibilities, for instance, for childcare and elderly care, as normal activities and normal arrangements have been disrupted. So the World Bank has been responding to this pandemic in a number of ways. We have a 4-pillar strategy focused on saving lives, helping the poor and vulnerable, keeping companies and businesses afloat, and also helping countries to build back better and recover better. We've provided financial support to about 30 small states so far, amounting to more than $1 billion. For us, small states are states with a population of less than 1.5 million people. It includes both island economies, but also non-island economies that meet that particular criterion. So $1 billion has gone to that group since the beginning of April of last year, and about $600 million of that has been for COVID response. We, as you probably know, in the bank have two financing arms. One is IDA, the International Development Association, the International Development Association, which provides concessional financing. About 10, 12 years ago, IDA increased its annual availability for small states by about tenfold. We went from 1.5 million SDRs to 15 million SDRs, no matter how big the small state is. And so we've seen a very, very strong increase in the amount of concessional financing that goes to small states. National allocations tripled for most small states over that period of time. And by the way, we have many countries that would not be eligible for concessional financing at the World Bank if they were large states, but are eligible under a special exemption that makes them continue to have access to concessional financing even after they pass the threshold for concessional borrowing. And a result of this, by the way, is that the average small state now receives about $85 per capita from IDA, if it's IDA eligible, compared to about $15 per capita for non-small states, of which, by the way, some, such as some of the Sahel countries, are actually poorer and more vulnerable than small states are. We're in the process right now of replenishing IDA. IDA loses money. That's the nature of concessional lending. You don't get all the money paid back, so you need fresh money to be injected into the structure. We do that every 3 years, but because of COVID-19, IDA 19, which is our most recent replenishment period, was shortened to 2 years instead of the normal 3 years to make it possible for us to give countries a much larger financing boost. We've done that, and we're now in the midst of negotiating the IDA 20 replenishment. And I really hope that small states will make their voices heard with respect to the IDA donors as we go through that replenishment process. And the Small States Forum, which my department in the World Bank manages, and which meets alongside both the annual meetings and the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank, is intended to help give small states the voice to make that possible. We have also done a lot on the IBRD side. I won't spend that much time talking about that. Suffice it to say that if you are a small state, the World Bank makes financing available in two ways: through the concessional International Development Association. We've provided about $1 billion of financing to 30 small states since April of last year. And of that $1 billion, about $600 million was available for COVID response. That's been a very significant amount of money. A lot of it is available to small states that are actually above the IDA cutoff for eligibility. We have a special exemption for small states that allows them, under certain circumstances, to borrow on IDA terms despite being above that amount. And as a consequence, the average per capita allocation of IDA concessional resources to eligible small states is around $85 per capita, compared to around $15 per capita for non-small states. So that's a very, very significant increase. We also provide IBRD financing, that's the non-concessional financing of the bank, to small states that are above the IDA cutoff and also not eligible under the special exemption for small states. There, small states have access to the most attractive IBRD pricing, and they were also exempted from the price increase that went through in 2018 as part of the capital package agreement for the World Bank agreed with World Bank donors. So very significant financing for small states. We are currently very strongly focused on vaccine acquisition and deployment. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is critical for enabling small states to emerge from COVID, particularly those small states that are dependent on tourism. We currently have 40 countries with vaccine projects that are financed by the World Bank. 8 of those 40 are small states. We are making our support available to any country that wants it. So there are many other operations in the pipeline. The big constraint right now is not so much financing, but the availability of vaccines on the market. And we are working very closely both with COVAX and with the African Union Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, as well as manufacturers through our private sector arm, the International Finance Corporation, to help acquire and deploy vaccines to as many poorer countries as we possibly can, and of course also to small states. This is a very, very important effort at the moment. So let me leave it there and pass it back to you, Juliet.
Thank you very much for that, John Zutt. Please don't go away, because there was so much there which gives ground for tremendous optimism. Clearly, a lot is happening in terms of the finance tools that the bank is making available to the SIDS regions. But what are you expecting in terms of outcomes? And given the difficulties and the fact that you are working with COVAX, is it perhaps premature or optimistic to look for a timeline when the positives can occur, the positive outcomes?
Well, I think the good news is that we've seen a lot of vaccines come on stream over the last 6 months or so. Manufacturing capacity is stepping up. We're seeing some of the richer countries that frankly locked up a lot of the early vaccine availability starting to release doses, granting those doses to poorer countries, or releasing them back into the market. That will help as well. But the reality is that for many countries, particularly if there is also the need for a booster, which is, I believe, still undecided technically. But if there is need for a booster, many countries will find that they will not be able to get sufficient shares of their population vaccinated until sometime in 2022 to be able to have herd immunity. So many countries are still facing serious challenges.
And I'm glad as well that you've mentioned that the booster vaccination, because that is certainly the debate that we're hearing in many developed economies around the world. But John Zutt, thank you so much for that and really outlining the World Bank's position. All I can say now is have a wonderful afternoon, what remains of it, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. And to all of you, please stay safe.
Overture Solutions, leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, was proud to bring its official support to the Group of SIDS Leaders Conference.